Yoo-hoo! I'll make you famous.
You're not any good.
I am good.
No! God! Oh, God, Harold, are you okay?
I was going to put him, excuse me.
Stop breaking the law, asshole!
I'm sorry, babe. I didn't mean that.
Lincoln, get out! Get out, Lincoln! Get out!
Do you know what I should do? I really should listen to that first to get me amped up before my intro, but anyway. All right, here we go on the LSD podcast, episode number 4. Lincoln Sharp discussions. I'm excited because, first of all, I have purchased a new microphone, a Fifine 960, and let me tell you, the unboxing experience is something I've never had before. I've seen it done online, but no, I guys appreciate it. It was great. Secondly, my guest today, we've tried 3 times to hook up and get this interview happening. Finally, I had to get up at 3:30 in the morning to make this happen, but he is the host of My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, Esoteric America, and booking agent for Sam Tripoli's Tinfoil Hat and all the other podcasts that he does. Mystic Mark is on LSD. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you so much, Lincoln, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad we finally made it happen. The microphone sounds amazing, so great choice there. I'm not sure what model it is, but you picked a good one, and yeah, I'm excited to be here, man. It's cool to speak with someone who's on the other side of the globe, so I appreciate you accommodating my time zone schedule.
No problem at all. Thank you for your time. Should we say globe or not? This microphone, this microphone, it's Fifine 690. It's I got it on I guess Thailand or Southeast Asia's version of eBay. It's called Lazada. And dude, 24 hours after I ordered online, it was at my doorstep. I'm so happy. And I watched the, have you seen those unboxing reels where people would buy a new product, unbox it and open it up, spin the box? It's so satisfying. And I never experienced it before until I bought this microphone. And I'm just like unwrapping it out of the foam. But first of all, the box casing was like so comfortable. Then the foam interior, and it's like, and then I plugged it all in. I'm like, oh man, this is just like exactly what I wanted. So yeah, that was pretty cool. Yeah. So how did you get involved with being a booking agent for Sam Tripoli and Tinfoil Hat? How did that come around? I actually watched Sam Tripoli on your show last night on YouTube, maybe 12, 18 months ago. Maybe I think you said you were 27 in the episode, so maybe a couple of years ago. But how did that come into place?
Yeah, that was 2 years ago. And it's interesting because I had listened to podcasts just out of interest. I'd always been interested in all these strange subjects in all the books you see behind me on my shelf. And until I found like the audio outlet for it, it was really kind of like a side hobby, an interest that I didn't always have time to fully entertain because I had a full-time job. I was young, just dropping out of college. So I was doing delivery jobs. I was doing, anything I could find that was not totally boring and didn't drug test. That was the other issue I had to skirt around because I've been a pothead since I was in high school. So yeah, I found some pretty interesting jobs because of that. And then, as a delivery driver, naturally podcasting made its way into my routine. And I was so impressed to see like all of these different people talking about all these subjects that I just thought were like nestled away in books. I didn't really know that there was this whole community of of people exchanging ideas, and even people who didn't necessarily even want to write books. They were just talking about it and philosophizing, and kind of gave me hope because I remember in high school I was like, "Oh yeah, I could be a philosopher. That sounds cool." But then you look at like the prospects of that, and it's like, well, how would you even get a job doing something like that? Back
Yeah.
then in 2010, when I was in high school, I'm relatively young. It didn't seem very feasible. But anyways, long story short, I eventually became a big fan of Tinfoil Hat and of course Sam Tripoli. Being a comedian, I was able to go and see him live in New York City, which is not too far away from where I live now. Takes a little bit to get there, but it's worth it. And I go
Mm.
to New York every now and then, but that day I went to New York City with the intention of not just seeing Sam's show, but giving him a book. And my sister had an apartment there at the time in Brooklyn, so I went to her place and she helped me sew up this Faraday fabric bag. You know what Faraday fabric is?
I do. I do. Yeah.
So I wanted to give Sam one of these bags just for the sake of his own, safety or privacy,
Mm.
maybe, right? To have a
Mm.
Faraday fabric bag for his cell phone. And
Yeah.
I thought, oh, well, it'd be cool if I could, fit the book in there. So my sister and I sewed this up together because she had a sewing machine. And I went and I gave him this book, nice and wrapped up in Faraday fabric. And it just kind of, I didn't really have any intentions of like explaining it to him. I just wanted him to have it. I didn't even think I would have that much time to talk to him. So after the show goes down, a couple of the guys that I was talking to while waiting in line were like, "Oh, we're gonna go to that after party Sam mentioned," because some other comedy club was still open and Sam was gonna go there and hang out, maybe do another spot. So just synchronistically met up with these guys who happen to have a car. Because in New York City, if you don't have a car, it takes like an hour, 2 hours to get
Mm.
somewhere, right? But on foot or public transit. So Sam, I guess, was going to drive over there. I managed to get over there. So I held on to the book. I get to this other place, this club called The Creek and the Cave. And there it was pretty cool. I got to talk to Sam for like 5 or 10 minutes. I gave him the book. I explained it to him, why I wanted to give it to him. But I was very nervous. I was like, all right, thanks, Sam. And I left right into the night, into New York City, not really thinking like anything would come of that. And then a few weeks later, I reached out to him through the Patreon that he had for Tinfoil Hat at the time. And I said, "Hey, did you get a chance to read that book?" And he said, "Oh, no, but come on the podcast and talk about it." So he didn't have me on Tinfoil Hat right away. He had me on his Patreon show. And that kind of one thing led to another. And I do that show a couple times. Then he has the Zero that he put out, and I helped him book guests for that. He asked me to do that. And, he was impressed with what I did. So he offered, to work for Tinfoil Hat. So now I'm booking for Tinfoil Hat, which is really fun. And I love it because, it's just it's surreal to go from being a fan of something to working for it, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. I bet.
really
Yeah.
cool
And
gig.
hanging out with Johnny and XG. I guess virtually, most likely.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, I haven't really spent all that much time with Johnny or XG. I met XG once in person and it was really cool. My girlfriend and I and my sister went and saw Sam and XG and Eddie this past summer when they came to Connecticut where I live. They did just some random show here and yeah, that was cool. So I was finally able to meet XG, but yeah, it's interesting. I
Mm.
do talk to them more often than I would have, obviously, but it's interesting because it's virtual, right? So I'm all the way on
Yeah.
the other
Yeah.
side of the country. But either way, it's still a lot of fun, and yeah, I definitely feel like I'm a part of a larger podcast community, and part of that process for me was, extending that and that's why I created Alt Media United some time after I started working with Sam. It's kind of like a thought that I had, like, well, I have my podcast. I'm meeting a bunch of people through working for Sam's podcast. Why don't we create a website where all these podcasts can get together and have a platform that's not going to censor them? So, and I've been building that website one by one, and anybody who has a podcast, including yourself, is welcome to join and have their podcast featured on our website. It's free, no cost to be a part of it. And yeah, that's kind of like in my mind, the universe gave me something, so now I'm going to give something back, right? And that's helping other people learn how to podcast, and also with my podcast, helping people get into all these subjects that I've always found fascinating. So a very long-winded way of explaining it, but yeah.
You cover so many topics on your show. What episode are you up to now?
373 is coming
Yeah.
up tomorrow.
Is that
So,
on
yeah.
My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, or do you keep a running tally with all of your podcasts, or is that
No.
just...
Yeah, no, that's just My Family Thinks I'm Crazy.
That's
and
amazing, man. That is a lot of conversations.
Yeah, there's more episodes in the feed too. Not all of them are proper My Family Thinks I'm Crazy episodes. So I guess there's like something like 400 and something possibly or more.
Wow.
But yeah, so I've done a ton of stuff, like Esoteric America is one example of a show that kind of runs contiguously with the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy show. It's more specialized and also includes my girlfriend Tara, my friend Roman, and occasionally our friend Chad. So it's and of course the guests who typically tend to be listeners, because it's fun to talk to people who have their own podcast or write books or do something professionally that's worth talking about. But I think there's still a lot to be learned from just the average Joe who listens to a podcast too. I mean, I get tons of intriguing, crazy messages, the whole spectrum of interesting to why did you send this to me? And it's cool to get people in the Zoom meeting and have the opportunity to like look into their world and this is what they researched, and through the lens of like what's hidden in this country we live in.
Yeah, that's cool. I think I came across your podcast, My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, when I typed in Crow 777 in the search bar. I'd been listening to him for quite a while, and I decided to look up other people that he that had interviewed him, and you showed up, man. That was a fascinating interview. I think that's how I got onto you in the first place. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a similar kind of story in the sense that like I was interested in Crow's research. I started looking, and then next thing I know, I'm finding this podcast that I never heard of. And that's partly why I love being a booker, because I'm able to kind of make those connections and live in that world of like being open to the next person that's going to come along and have like some new research to add to the conversation. That's important, I think. But Crow 777's great. I remember first listening to him, I think on the Higher Side Chats, and
with Greg Carlwood. Yeah.
And I'm not sure quite if he had ever been on Tinfoil Hat before I started booking for Tinfoil Hat, but he was somebody who was on my list of like, all right, got to introduce this guy to Sam at some point, because that was a big.
Awesome. Oh, so you connected them, man. That's awesome.
Well, yeah, like I said, I'm not quite sure if Crow had been on the show before I had booked him, but he was definitely on my list of people who I was like, you got to have him on the show, if not again for the first time, right? So I that's kind of the fun of it too, is like Sam has his whole unique perspective, and it's interesting to see what he takes from a guest when I know the guest from my own perspective, and then to see how he takes it. It's interesting, him and I don't always agree on on everything. So I like to see where he sees things.
Yeah, yeah. Are you involved in the creation of his comic book for kids about the two twin sisters becoming superpowers and saving the world? Are you part of that production? And how's
Slightly,
that going?
I mean, very slightly. I helped, Thomas kind of, I don't know, pitch the idea to Sam in a way. I
That's
just kind
cool.
of put them
Yeah.
in touch for that to happen. But no, they've taken. Thomas is great. He's the guy who runs Paranoid American, and he does a lot of amazing things. No, I'm not privy to what goes down. I am involved slightly too in Juan from the Juan on Juan podcast. He has a
Yeah.
comic
Yep.
book going, and I'm a character in it, but I don't have any real say in like what happens. They asked me like when we first came up with the ideas, and I contributed some ideas like um just like little things here and there. But then when it came to Sam's comic, I told Thomas, I'm like, really, you should just talk to Sam yourself and see what he wants. Like, why would I why would I know what
Sure.
Sam wants out
Sure.
of the
Yeah.
comic? Yeah, no, not
Yeah.
really involved too much. Just happily cheering that project on. I think it's cool.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. So five. Actually, I did notice that you did a top five with Greg Carwood not long ago, which is funny because even before I saw that episode with you and heard that episode with you and him, I was planning to do a top five of the episodes of yours that I've listened to. Included in that was Greg Carwood, but Jim Gale as well, who I want to start communicating with because here in Thailand, my wife and I have just recently purchased an acre, which is about 2.5 rai, which is the measurement they use here in Thailand. And yeah, man, we got some plans for gardening, for putting in an orchard, a house of our own. But what Jim Gale is doing across America and this movement that he's starting actually across the world is absolutely outstanding. Can you fill me in a little bit more on your conversation with him? And has that inspired you in any way to get into growing your own food?
Yeah, I personally can't right now, but Jim's opinion would be that nobody can ever not grow food. Like even
Mm,
if you're in an apartment like me, you could still grow food. So
mm,
on that note, I shouldn't say I can't, but no, yeah, I've been inspired, and it's something as far as my long-term plan of life and having a home and a family and all that, I definitely foresee um, having a food forest in that future. I think it's a lot more feasible than people might expect. The idea of farming your own food sounds like a whole full-time job. And
mm,
from what I understand, it is still a lot of work, but it can really cut down on your spending, which would then possibly lead to you working less in the long run, right? I mean,
mm,
at the job that you have, right? So I think there's a lot of there's a cost benefit ratio that has to be balanced and determined on a personal level, but it, the costs of the agricultural system that we have now, it's rapidly spinning out of control. So I think what
mm,
Jim's offering is a solution to that. Not only would you cut down on this kind of international dependency that we've put ourselves in, this situation where we're depending on other countries for different produce at different points in different seasons. This is not a sustainable or a very stable way to manage the food system. And I think what
mm,
Jim's offering is a really like a groundbreaking, radically different, but not really. It's just radically different from what we've been doing the past 100 to 200 years, right? I mean,
mm,
before that, what Jim's proposing, I think really is would have been more commonplace 2, 3, 400 years ago. Maybe not as obvious to people in every part of the world. Not all countries have the same kind of trajectory, but I think the idea is that our landscape can be harnessed and tapped into, and you can produce abundance through a harmonious relationship with our landscape. And if you look at the average home, you look at the average backyard, it's not a harmonious relationship. You have, this sort of uh, lawn that's meant to be this kind of like augmented reality of nature. It's not actually a natural place. It's this like kind of stale, it's like a stagnant pond in some sense, like you're not really allowing the biodiversity of the ecosystem you're in to flourish. You're kind of like cutting it off at the knee. So, yeah, I love Jim. I'm not the expert clearly, but I do like having those conversations on my podcast because it's inspiring stuff. And I think a lot more people ought to know how easy or how attainable, rather, it could be to have your own really healthy food. And that's the other side of it. It's like, do you want to trust these companies that have, labels and side ingredients and all these like nasty chemicals in the process of growing the food that might not even make it into the label, into the ingredients, but are still affecting the food you're eating? Do you want to take a chance on that, or would you rather know exactly where your food's coming from? And I think the more people start to realize how many chemicals are in our environment, the quicker they'll realize, well, I can't stop the world from doing what it's going to do, but I can control this piece of property that I have here and do the best I can to keep it clean and grow organic foods on the land that I have. So yeah, I think
yeah.
on that note, everybody ought to be doing that. Cities, the hive world that they're creating in cities, I don't know. I don't see how it's sustainable. Some people think it could be sustainable in the future if we have the right technology, but I prefer to live in a world where everybody has their own space and their own food. That way nobody's coming in knocking on my door for taxes or to work for them so they could eat or they could, have a place to be. So yeah. I don't know. I'm not the expert on the topic, but I do enjoy having those conversations on my show.
And for those who don't know what Jim Gale is offering, I think he's proposed or he's mentioned that lawn grass in everyday backyard around the world is the biggest crop ever in history, and it's really doing nothing. So where that grass is grown, potentially you could grow your own food, grow your own garden, walk around all year round and harvest your own food, like you said, knowing exactly what's gone into it, completely organic. We have a little home with a little yard here just north of Bangkok, and we've done that. We've planted chilies, cucumbers. I've actually got some beets going at the moment, and papaya. It's incredible what you can just actually make grow. Luckily, we're here in the climate, which is just amazing for growing things. But no, Jim's extremely inspiring, and the energy that he brings to a conversation as well. I really can't wait to spend some time talking with him as well. So another standout for me that you had on your show, and so have I. I've spoken with Dr. Narco Longo. His Old World, Florida, absolutely is a standout to me. It blows my mind, the information that he brings and the research that he's done. Have you, when I had him on, I started off speaking about language and the origins of the phonetics and where English sort of comes from. Then we moved on to, I think, more of the zodiac, which is fantastic. But next time I have him on, I want to speak more about Old World, Florida. Does that interest you as much as it does me?
Yeah, the whole old world conversation is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
Mostly because I live somewhere where, I found evidence that there's old structures kind of being ignored.
Here we go. Yep.
And it's not necessarily what you would see in a lot of the Tartaria videos that have become popular. But that's why I really like what Dr. Narco Longo has done, because he's entertained a lot of those ideas, but then added a lot of really great research and source work, finding actual sources of information, tracing back the actual meaning of words and names, and trying to figure out who these people really were that existed in this mysterious time between 1492 and 1620, and before that too. Because I mean, before 1492, I think there were plenty of people from outside of North and South America who were traveling here. Whether those people were part of some advanced free energy society, I don't know, maybe in the far, far distant past. But I really like what Dr. Narco Longo has found and suggests, because it kind of falls in line with a lot of researchers I've found, who suggest that cultures from the Mediterranean, from Africa, from Europe, had come to North America hundreds of years before Columbus, and had mingled, or, become one with, so to speak, the Native American groups that were here. Um, and who knows, maybe the Bering Land Strait never happened. Maybe it did happen, but those groups of people, like I said, mingled with the various groups of people that came from elsewhere. Because, when you look at anthropology and archaeology, they give us this very incomplete explanation for things. And then when they come upon evidence that suggests elsewise or otherwise, they just say, oh, well, that doesn't fit, so it's not relevant. It's a hoax. It's not real. And I found structures with my own eyes in the forest here in my home state, and there's plenty of others that have been documented, and I'm sure undocumented as well, because I've found one that's undocumented, right? So if I've found something that's undocumented, and I'm just one random guy walking through the woods, there's got to be other structures like this. So to give people a picture of what I'm talking about, in the woods, my girlfriend and I, Tara, we were driving along the road, and we saw this strange like stone off the side of the road, and it looked like a standing stone to me. So I pulled over, and we got out of the road, out across the road, and went into the woods, and I'm like, wow, yeah, that's a standing stone. And off maybe 20 feet behind it was this big, huge boulder. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, that looks like an anvil. You ever see an anvil and how it has
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah. So I'm like, is that an anvil? And it's on another stone. So I go over to it, and I look at it from the side. And what I thought was like the, horn of an anvil is actually this like elongated stone, almost like a finger coming off of a main boulder, right?
Yeah.
And it's propped up on another boulder, almost like pointing in a direction. And from the other side, I look at it, I'm like, oh, it kind of looks like a goose. If you saw a goose sitting in the water, it has a body and the head, So I have a picture of it I could show you. But, it's just fascinating that this giant, massive stone is sitting here in the forest, and it just, it's not really talked about. I think it's in an alignment with some other structures that have been written about. But let me show you, because it's my screen, my home screen, if you can see.
Sure. Yep. I'll just click on that. Yeah,
So, yeah,
wow,
that's
that
the
is
boulder,
amazing. Yep.
And it's on top of like a stone platform almost, and it's surrounded by
Yeah.
weeds. It's kind of hard to tell that it's not really on like ground level. It's actually kind of on like a little mound, and all the weeds are very overgrown. But yeah, this is in an alignment called the Hammonasset ley line, and my girlfriend and I found this book describing the Hammonasset ley line after we interviewed somebody who told us there was a vortex in New York. So we're like, okay, let's try. It's not too far from us, this town in New York. It's called Woodstock. It's pretty famous for the whole,
Yeah. The music
hippie
festival.
festival. Yep. So we go there, and there's a apparently a portal near Hunter Mountain. So we go there and drive around, and we go to a used bookstore like we always do. And here we go. This book not only has a ley line in it that goes through our area, but it like goes right through almost where we grew up, like, like very close to where myself and my girlfriend have spent our most of our lives, right? So
Yeah.
just instantly puzzling. And then we start talking about this on the podcast, and my friend Mike Wan tells us, oh, you should look up Peter Shampoo's book. And so we get Peter Shampoo's book, and sure enough, not only does he describe these ley lines, but he shows us one that goes directly through our hometown. So not just vaguely through our home state, but directly
Mm.
through our hometown. So now
Mm.
I'm like, wow, okay, this has been in my reality my whole life. I just wasn't aware of it. And there are all these stone structures hidden throughout this area. And
Mm.
maybe the ley lines have something to do with it, maybe the energy lines or whatever it is. But that's kind of where I've found myself really fascinated with this whole old world conversation, because it seems to me like whatever's built here by the Native Americans or whoever is a lot
Mm.
like what we see in the old world in England, in Scotland, in Northern Europe, where they have the henges and the dolmens. And so it's all very, I don't know, it kind of follows that same pattern. And I think what that could mean is, like Narcolongo suggests, there was a connection between the old world, what we call the old world, and the new
Mm.
world. And this new world that the Columbus and his gang wanted to call this the new world is
Mm.
actually the old world, right? This is the
Yeah.
older world. This is where, there's more evidence of this ancient time pre-flood. Maybe the Caribbean or the Atlantic had some land masses that are now underwater, and the people that
Mm.
live there kind of went in a circular direction outside
Yeah.
of Atlantis, right? Which would be
Yeah.
Europe, Africa, South America, and North America. So I
Yeah.
think that's why we have these similarities between the ancient cultures of these places, not only in the
Mhm.
structures they left behind, but the myths that they tell, whether it's giants, beings flying through the sky, the thunderbird, the dragon, so on and so forth. So, yeah,
Mm.
there's tons of connections. And
Mm.
I'm not in Florida, so I'm perfectly comfortable that Dr. Narco Longo is the man on the scene down
He
there.
really is, isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm focused on where I grew up, and I
Yeah.
like to look at a guy like him and kind of compare notes and say, like, okay, well, this is where he's looking. Maybe I could see if there's something like that here where I'm at. And, you
Mm.
know, it's cool to be a part of this kind of network of people researching that topic, hence the show Esoteric America.
Yeah, very cool. Yep. And in the people that you have interviewed, a lot of people talk about Atlantis and Tartaria. Are they assumed to be around the similar era or on the similar timeline? Or how can you break them down for me? Like, explain them to me so I can sort of understand exactly what people honestly know about Tartaria and Atlantis.
Well, that's the thing. There's very little that we know about
Hmm.
these things. There's
Yeah, there's
there's
a lot of
hypotheses.
assumptions and a lot of guesses, but
Yeah.
but it's fascinating. There's a lot of people just doing commentary on it. So yeah,
Well, I could say what I know and what I think I
yeah,
can
please,
safely say is known, and then I'll also say what I think I like to speculate. But hey, I'm open minded, and I have my own
yeah,
bias,
same,
right?
yeah,
So we all do, right? So with Tartaria, I would say the conversation about Tartaria is one that I would say exists within the past 2,000 years.
mm-hmm,
So we're talking about a culture that existed somewhere in Asia, possibly expanding out to North America, probably involved in trading, because all big
mm-hmm,
nations have to be. So they were probably spread out pretty far. And they were either taken out by the Roman Empire, written out of history by them, because that's a big deal of where we get our history from, is from
Yeah,
that
it's
whole canon
sure
of
written by the winners. Yeah.
right. So, and
Mm.
we have all these stories of the barbarous Mongols, the hordes, and they're just wicked, evil, and bad, and all bad. But they were clearly good at what they did, which takes
Mm.
some level of competency. They weren't completely savages if they were able to conquer an entire continent, possibly the largest swath of space any one group has ever conquered.
Mm. Mm.
So I guess the thought with Tartaria is like all of that couldn't have just disappeared. Something what
Yeah.
like had to have amounted to something, and it must have been written out of history. And I think the big difference between Tartaria and Atlantis isn't like it's one or the other. I think it's more so about like the age between. Like when we're talking about
Ah. Okay.
Atlantis, we're talking about pre-flood. When we're
Yes.
talking about
Yeah.
Tartaria, we're talking about post-flood.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who will tell you that, well, there have been cataclysms in the past 200 years or 300 years, much shorter than the thousands of years ago.
Mm.
And that's
Mm.
what we need to focus on, because Tartaria was erased in these cataclysms that happened around the time that historians call the Dark Ages, right? That's when.
Okay. Ah.
So I don't necessarily buy into that 100%, but then again, I'm not from the Russian speaking world, so I don't
Mm.
know all the history of that land. And I think there's a great deal of information that's probably been kept from the rest of the world from that. And I think communism inherently has to do with that, right? Because the Chinese, one of the big things with them is like, oh, well, the Great Wall of China wasn't built by the Chinese. It was
Mm.
built by whoever was fighting them, because it's facing China, right? The wall,
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
gun turrets are facing them. They're not facing outside, right?
Mm.
So there's a thought that, oh, well, the Great Wall of China was actually built by this other group, and maybe that was part of this communism, coming in and destroying the old architecture and putting in this new architecture that's all very concrete and brutalism, like they say in the architecture world, where it's very like oppressive and dominating, and it's a favorable type of architecture for governments that have similar psychological bent, which is brutality and totalitarianism, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't negate that. I just think that there's far more evidence in the English speaking world for an old world Atlantis advanced civilization. I think the pyramids
Mm.
point to that. I think the
Yeah.
megaliths point to that. I think the alignments with the stars point to that. And when you look at the arguments for Tartaria, it's a lot about mud floods, which, to my knowledge, are are things that could be geologically understood and measured. You can look at the geological table and tell when things have moved and what direction they've moved. So I
Mm.
don't necessarily think that, maybe those studies have been done, but they can be done, right? So until
Mm.
those things have been done, I don't know that I'm necessarily going to 100% buy into the whole mud flood idea, but mud floods do happen. I mean, it's something that happens on the earth. Mud slides, rock slides, they're
Yeah.
usually
Yeah.
called. And I'm sure if there was a greater amount of water, like a deluge, it could seem like a mud flood if you're in a really dry area and it picked up all that soil and whatnot. So
Mm. Yeah.
that part of it, I think there's still a lot to be learned. But when it comes to like the Star Fort conversation and that idea
Oh,
that all these
amazing.
old buildings,
Amazing. Yeah.
you know, it's very interesting to see how things were built in the past, but
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
necessarily think that that's because it's a part of some culture that's lost now. I
Mm.
think it's
Mm.
more that the people who built those buildings built them at a time when those sorts of things were more feasible.
Mm.
Nowadays, there are a lot of barriers in place in terms of human rights, in terms of laws, in terms of labor, in terms of materials, in terms of shipping, in terms of resources, in terms of
Mm,
zoning. I
mm.
mean, it's such a complicated subject. And when a lot of people who are, seemingly really popular, right? They get a lot of traction on these social media platforms talking about the old buildings and how old they are and how they don't conform and how it doesn't make sense and why don't we have pictures of them being built?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
that's really all they ever stand on is the pictures and the drawings and the
mm.
maps. And I'm like, architecture and construction, there's records to all this stuff. Like you could
Yeah,
go and
yeah,
look
there
up
is.
where they got the materials, who they got them from. You could probably
Mm,
even find, who built it, right? So, and I've
yeah.
done that on the podcast. I've debunked people who say, and I don't do it in a negative, mean way, but I had
Mm,
someone on the podcast who said, "Oh, and I've never seen a picture of this building being constructed." And all I did was I typed in the name of the building and then I typed in construction photos. And on right there, clear as day for anybody, Google Earth, it's or Google just search engine, we
yeah.
saw literally the pictures of it being built from foundation to finish,
Okay.
step by step.
What building was that? Can I ask?
Yeah, this was somewhere in Minneapolis. We were talking
Okay.
about
Yep.
like the St. Paul Cathedral or something. And again, no
Okay. Cool.
disrespect
Yeah.
to this guest. He was a really smart dude and had an
Yep.
interesting theory. But
Mm,
when someone says, "Oh, well, there's no pictures of it being constructed," and then
yeah.
you find them, it's like, well, how can I take everything else you're saying all that seriously if you haven't even done the like first two steps to figure out whether what you're saying is true or not,
Yeah. Mm,
So
yep.
that's not necessarily, proof that all of this stuff isn't worthwhile, but I think
Mm,
that's what I run into more often than not is a lot of conjecture and speculation rather than hard evidence. And
mm-hmm.
when it comes to Atlantis, you have hard evidence. You can't like these megaliths are hard evidence, like the structures underwater, that's hard evidence. Telling me
Mm,
that the church down the street from my house was actually built 500 years before they tell us it was built by a whole different group of people who
mm,
aren't here anymore. I mean, it's just a lot to prove. And I wonder if it's almost like a psyop to like throw people off of the real truth that is like we are being lied to about the old world, then we are in the old world. But it's not
mm,
this old world that got buried in a mud flood. It's this old world that connects us to the real source of Egypt, like what was going on in Egypt, what was going on at the beginning of what we can trace back in written history, this post flood situation where there
mm,
was clearly a cataclysm that destroyed most of humanity, and the people who survived started to build it back up. And I've talked to so many different people who have different theories about that time period. And I think that's kind of where a lot of our mythology, our cultures, they all point to that, whether
mm-hmm.
it's indigenous cultures, whether it's more civilized cultures, they all have myths about the origins of humanity and surviving with the help of the gods or the help of this older brother being or this, father spirit or however they rationalize it or
Mm,
remember it, you know. And I think that's where the conversation needs to be focused. With Tartaria, I'm sure there's stuff that communism has hidden from us. I'm
mm,
sure there's stuff that Russia and China, those there's secrets about cultures that have existed there, and the governments in power now are suppressing it. I'm sure of it. But if you're telling me that, you know, pre 1700s America had all these stone builder people in it, I mean, that's just downright insulting to the Native Americans who we do have records of. And it's not that they couldn't build in stone. That's the other thing is the Native Americans knew how to build in stone.
mm,
So if we're talking about, people who built these amazing cathedrals and then the mean European settlers just came and took the signs down and put their name on it. I I feel like this is a very kind of short-sighted thing to be looking into without actually like going to that time period, 1492 to 1620, and seeing what those people actually wrote about the New World. And when you do start to pierce through that, it starts to seem like the people who were in the New World, the conquistadors and those early explorers, they had some ideas about what they were looking for. And some of those ideas came from the history of Atlantis. They thought they found Atlantis. They didn't find Tartaria. So that's kind of where I would set my sights. I could be all wrong. I could be totally off the mark. Maybe I'm too skeptical, but I do think that, you know, the fact that the CIA mentions Tartaria, and that's one of the only mentions of it in the like, if you type the word Tartaria in, you'll find very few source materials about it, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But in that, the CIA has some information about it. So I don't know. Maybe it's because we're just not privy to the world of, you know, the Cyrillic languages, and that hasn't been translated into English yet. But I have a hard time thinking that there was a civilization other than the ones that we're told were in this area, aside from the ones that could have traveled via ocean, which then again could be the Russians, the Chinese, the Japanese. There's evidence of them all along the West Coast. But I just don't think that they would have, you know, completely expanded across America and had this whole Star Fort lighthouse situation going on here, and it all just got taken over. I don't know. I have a hard time believing that.
Yeah. I've got a mate down in Antarctica at the moment. I shouldn't say down in, but he's over in Antarctica at the moment, and he has just spent 6 weeks offline. Haven't heard from him because he's been 1,200 kilometers south, servicing the machinery over there. And I've been trying to get onto him about if he could do a Zoom call or a StreamYard with me. And he goes, not too sure about that, but we can chat when you get back, because he's constantly sending me photos of the activity that's going on down there. It's absolutely fascinating. But he knows I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist and a rabbit hole chaser. And just recently, the last snap, excuse me, that he sent was the sun coming up, but it literally had, I could see like half the sun well up over the horizon. So it looked like a half circle. It looked quite amazing. Whether that was, just the what it was rising over, but it looked awesome. But his caption was "Flat Earth?" ? I'm like, righto, Harry, here we go, buddy. That's a different story altogether. But I wanted to talk about why you think cities and buildings on the cornerstone or the display stone says founded by Sir General whoever, and it's founded, never built or opened by, like the city of Melbourne here in Australia, founded in 1790 something. Cities are founded, like the area, like did they just come across this establishment, or was it, why do they use the word founded by?
Yeah, again, like I think there is some truth to that, and I'm sure there have been whole cities and civilizations that have been, quote unquote civilized, and then we don't learn anything about what it was like when they found it. But
yeah,
I think
so. What did they find? Like,
yeah, well, when it comes to the word "found," I mean,
Yeah,
it also could mean foundation, and every
Sure,
building
yeah.
needs a foundation. And typically you build a building from the ground up. So to be the founder of something is not just to participate in the construction of it, but to envision it from floor to ceiling. So that's kind of what I think of when I hear the term foundation or founded. But you have a point there. I mean, that's where some of this stuff gets lost on me. Like the whole thing with the I being a J, and how the year 1900 is actually 900, and the whole 1,000-year phantom time. That's interesting. I think there could be something to that with the calendars, but but I don't know if it's as drastic as 1,000 years is just made up and everything in between that is just written about and didn't happen. I
Yeah.
think that's where maybe it goes a step too far, but the kernel of the idea there has some truth to it, and that's how I think all of these ideas become as popular as they are, because there's a kernel of truth to it. The Tartaria conversation, there is absolutely truth there. Think about all the cultures that were burned at the stake by the Catholics, the Albigensian Crusade, how many people even know about that, right? I mean, this small group of people in Europe that survived all these brutal, inquisitions from the Catholic Church over and over and over again. And all of
Yeah.
the Native Americans, South Native Americans, indigenous peoples all over the world, however they want to describe themselves, First Nations, whatever, however they want to be termed, these people, they had a complex, sophisticated culture that was met with colonialism, this big, like, you know, battering ram that comes in and smashes it to pieces and says, okay, put yourself back up together, but in our image, and I think that's kind of like what a lot of we're reconciling with that damage that's been done. And I think the people who play the victim game of it all take it too far in the other direction, where they make the average person completely uninterested in caring at all, where it's like, oh, cry for us because we've been so downtrodden and beaten, and put us on your pedestal for the next 1,000 years because we deserve it. It's like, get out of here, man. We're all equals. Get over it, right? That's kind of how I feel about it at the end of the day. But I
Yeah.
think that Tartaria conversation, the old world conversation, the history's lying to us conversation, I think those are all like scratching that itch that we have, because we all know that these government forces have they've kind of like cinched things in a really neat way, and they've controlled us into this paradigm. But I wonder, is it a conspiracy that our brain tells our blood vessels where to move, like, or our heart tells our blood vessels, where to pump? Like, are our blood vessels under some great conspiracy by our heart to like never live a free will, or are they willingly like, yeah, let's move through this body and keep this organism, keep this party going? Yeah, I think there's two sides of it. Like, yeah, the leaders of the world are misguided and stupid and make mistakes, and probably worse, condone killings of thousands of people and worse than that, right? So I'm not saying that they're perfect, but I think it's like we have to see things in terms of like we're all one giant organism. And I wonder if, like, this kind of comes from a guy I just talked to, James True. Like, what if this idea of the flat earth is flat when you see it that way, the globe earth is globular when you see it that way? So like the government was like, all right, draw the maps like this, nobody else can know about any of the other land. Once we have the maps just this way, nobody will be able to even go to those other lands, because consciously they can't even see it. It'll burn their eyes.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of that going on, where people are like, you're telling me the earth is, we've discovered it all? Get out of here, man. There's
Get
more
out of here.
to it.
Isn't there just recently they've discovered 7,000 islands off Japan? Did you
Right.
see that within the last 12 months? I mean, come on. Like,
Well, and just because Google Earth doesn't show it doesn't mean it's
Exactly.
not there. I mean,
Yeah.
you could go down the TikTok rabbit hole for days. I've seen some Google Earth stuff where people show you like invisible airplanes on like airstrips on military bases, and they're like,
Yeah.
look, they're using cloaking devices. Like, clearly these are planes, but Google
Sure.
Earth can't pick them up. But there's like,
Yep.
you see like the silhouette of it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on, and I don't necessarily trust satellites either, when it comes to showing us what's on the earth. I think there's probably a great deal of computer generation that goes on with that whole process, where they're
Oh,
just kinda
100%.
generating
Yeah.
images.
Yep. Yeah, with the tracking, you can track boats. David Weiss has chased this one. You can track on the shipping tracker. Boats are, hundreds and hundreds of kilometers into Antarctica. It's like, how are these boats down there? Because, on the images that we can find via Google Earth, it's all ice and land. And that's another psyop as well. Why is it when you look at the Google Earth that Antarctica is completely just white? I've seen pictures personally of my mate who's down there. There's quite a bit of land down there, but all we see on the CGI or the images on Google is just white. It's just white. It screams go away. Have you seen that Australian fisherman boat? Just a little fishing boat with about 4 or 5 blokes on it. They call themselves Bad Boys, and they got intercepted by an Australian warship for being too far south. Have you seen that?
Oh wow!
It's hilarious, man. They're filming just on their phones. They're down there fishing like it'd be 50, 60 k's south of Australia, maybe even more, maybe 100 k's. But good boat for what they were on. Anyway, they see this big, I think it's the HMAS Hobart, an Australian warship, off in the distance, and then slowly but surely you can see it turning around and coming back towards them. And then they contact them on the radio. They reply, "Yeah, this is Bad Boys." And one of them's like, "Don't make a joke with these guys." They're literally steaming towards them, and they say, "You're in a maritime area. We need you to turn around." And the blokes are like, "No, we're just fishing." Like, it's worth a look up. I think you just need to. It's hilarious, man. One of them's having a laugh, one of them's freaking out. As you would. Like, one of them says, "Hey, get the drone out." He goes, "Don't get the drone out." It's
balls,
yeah.
Takes balls to be on the ocean, let alone with a big warship in your vicinity. I mean, those things could just steamroll you, and no one would know. But I saw one very strange video. These guys, again, I don't have a GPS, so I don't know. They weren't showing me the GPS. I don't know where they were. I'll just take them on their word. But they're like, "Yeah, we're in the Southern Ocean right now," and they go over this like weird like strip in the water. There's like this line in the water, and as they're approaching it looks like a wall of just fog, and they pass over it. And when they pass over, they realize like the water they're on now is very calm and placid. And right wherever they crossed, there's just like crazy, like fast currents going in.
Yeah, I've seen it. Amazing.
And it looked like a barrier of some kind. I mean, that's a way of keeping people out of certain parts of the world, the way the currents move. Maybe it has something to do with like the hollow earth and the ocean like flowing down into the earth. And I mean, who knows? I like to think anything's possible, but that's like one of the frontiers, and people they don't quite give our earth the credit it deserves on how wild and vast it really is.
Yeah. Have you heard of Angkor Wat in Cambodia? Yeah. Like you were saying about how the Chinese claim the wall, and but when you look at it, all the defense is facing towards China. It's like they're trying to keep the Chinese out, so we can only assume that it wasn't built by them but founded by them. It's funny that Angkor Wat, being such an exquisite temple, was only founded under 100 years ago, I think, wasn't it? I'm not sure, but quite recently. And what we know is that it's in Cambodia, and they don't really know how it was built, but it's incredibly designed. Like the geometry of it is so precise. It's not known how it was done. And and as soon as they started taking pictures of above with drones and stuff, they can see that the area expands quite a bit more. I bring it up because what we know is that it's Cambodian temple and stuff, but Thailand actually, like the Great Wall of China, they sort of, in a way, claim that it's on the original Siam land, which is the Greater Thailand, and because the entrances all face Thailand, face east. West. Cambodia is over here to the east of Thailand. So, yeah, they sort of think, yeah, I mean, Cambodia claims it, but like their sort of told history is that Angkor Wat is originally in Siam, the Greater Thailand. So yeah, I find that fascinating as well. Just like another story of what do we really know? Hey, yeah, pretty cool. Hey, yeah,
Yeah, no, well,
uh,
it makes me think of a couple things, but I love that you shared that because Thailand is one of these places where we have this ancient history that's been remembered, and they haven't really, been toppled by another culture. I mean, yeah, they've kind of been kind of molded into the whole Western world in some ways, but they still hold on to their heritage. I talked to a
mm,
guy in Thailand named Peter Jenks, and he's
okay,
written a book called Occult Thailand. I think you ought to reach out to him and see
sure.
if you
I'm just
can.
typing his name in. Yeah,
Yeah, Peter Jenks with a E, Jenx, and
a JENX.
yeah, and
JENX. Okay.
his book talks about how there's this whole magical world in Thailand with the buildings themselves, where different structures in the city will have like people's spirits in them, and in the past they would like literally sacrifice somebody when the building
Well.
or the structure was finished, but now it's more symbolic, and like when somebody passes away,
Mm-hmm.
they're dedicated to that structure, but it's like
Yeah.
a guardian spirit of that
Mm,
community, and
mm,
it's just really interesting to think of it that way, and I would make a a guess that they're probably right about Angkor Wat being a part of that world and that,
mm,
uh, culture of like complex spiritual thought. I think that's an indication that a culture is very old when it has such a complex spiritual worldview, you know?
mm. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Thailand is the only nation in Southeast Asia that wasn't colonized. Um,
Right.
I think the British were coming across through India. The French were coming across, which was Siam at the time, so Vietnam and Cambodia, and I forget the timeline, but Thailand was really split straight down the middle, which is interesting because there is the Chao Phraya River, which runs from north to south, which is the lifeline, the lifeblood of Thailand, which makes this nation so fertile. But it's interesting that the French sort of were coming from the east, the English were coming from the west, but Thailand, the king at the time, I think it was Rama V. I've done a little bit of research on him. He approached it more in a I think the word is a democratic sort of approach where he befriended the two nations. They tried to battle the French and lost in a big way. So they sort of accepted them into their country, and in doing that, not signed over their to becoming colonized by the French or the English. So they would send people to study in their nations. They would welcome the Germans, English, French to come and set up, build their style of colonial style buildings in Thailand, but they did always keep their heritage. So yeah, a very unique nation, and quite an amazing approach that they're still the only nation in Southeast Asia that was not colonized. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. I think that when it comes to Thailand, I could learn so much about it. I love
Mm,
learning about cultures, but I think we've been given like a political history of the world. And
mm.
sorry about that. Cat's having a little retch over here. Looks like she's all right. This cat's driving me crazy. But we're given like a political version of our history and even our
Mm,
maps. Really, I think we need to have more of an ethnic one, maybe. I don't know if ethnic is the right term, but But yeah, it's so much more complicated than like the political borders that were given. Because even within a country like Thailand, or as it was known in the past, Siam, like there's multiple, probably dozens of distinct different groups of people with their own language, their own culture, kind of mixing and intermingling. So it's
Yeah.
just so much that we're gonna learn, I think, in the next 200 years, if the internet and things kind of keep going in a positive, optimistic trajectory, like I think it will. I think we're gonna learn a lot about these other cultures and for instance, Tartaria and like the old world stuff that's been kind of, you know.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by that. Mark, what have you got coming up in 2024? Who have you got coming up? Who can I look forward to in your interviews? What's happening on Tinfoil Hat, and what's your outlook on 2024? The election coming up; it's a big year in the States. What's your take on all of that?
Well, it's exciting in the sense that, you know, when the whole thing happened 8 years ago, it seemed to kind of push this podcasting community forward a bit. So I don't know if that happens again with so much to talk about. I know I'm not going to become a political pundit anytime soon, but if it wakes more people up to the fake media and turns more people on to the real authentic media that we're participating in now, I'm excited for what's to come in that sense. But yeah, I'm optimistic. So as far as like 2024 goes, I'm just hoping that there aren't crazy riots again and people aren't, you know, psyoped and so on and so forth with the you know, medical malpractice industry and all the things that they're trying to pull off. But when it comes to like my show and Tinfoil Hat, my show, I have a really interesting interview coming out soon with a guy named James True. I just spoke with him today.
Yeah,
Very,
I've heard James on Crow 777 a few times. Yeah.
yeah, very unique perspective on a lot of things. So I was really taken back by that conversation, really enjoyed it, and excited to put that one out. For Tinfoil Hat, we just had like a legend guest that I think everybody should listen to, especially considering what's going on in the past decade. Is probably the most relevant news story in the past decade, which is the Epstein case, right? I mean, this is a story that is of prime importance, I think, to me as an American, especially, and not just as an American, because this is affecting like all the English speaking world. There's this kind of crime going on, I'm sure, in Australia and England and Europe, right? So, but yeah, Nick Bryan is the guy who first reported on Jeffrey Epstein, and we had him on Tinfoil Hat. So I highly recommend people check that interview out if they haven't already. Great stuff there.
Yeah, is that just recently?
Yeah, that one just came out. As far as like guests that are planned to be on the show, I can't give any of those out except for one, just because it's Sam's show, not my show.
Sure, yeah.
But this one already kind of came out there because I think this guest announced it on his show when I booked him. But we're gonna be having
heard it.
Ben.
Yeah. I've got played on my thing. I'd listen to it because that's epic information that he had, and he speaks so well. Like, what an episode, man. I really enjoyed that, and I like it that you guys, Tinfoil Hat, is now releasing it on Sam's on YouTube. So that's always good to see as well. So yeah. Mate, that is an epic episode. You know, Charlie Robinson just had a lady on. I listened last night, as well as your show, that he was saying that, Epstein was just a pawn in all this, but it's the Maxwell family that really, really, pulled the strings and controlled this whole disgusting network, I found that, I listened to it as I was falling asleep, but I got some good points out of that. I'll have to listen to that one again today. So, yeah, fascinating. So, yeah, I mean, we were told at the start of this year, January 1st or 2nd, that the list was going to be released, but there's confusion on whether it's because it's not the flight logs. No, maybe it is just the flight log. It's not the client list or something. I'm not sure, but man, there's a lot of this, a lot of that, and then like yeah.
Yeah, it was the client list, I think, and what
Okay.
Nick said is that it didn't even exist to begin with. It was all just
Yeah.
a big bunch of nothing. So, and they even were going to interview him on, I think CNN, and then they decided not to interview him. So,
Wow.
that's telling. But yeah,
Yep.
it's definitely an important story, and I'm going to be having Nick on my show too this week. So, look
Awesome.
forward to that. And
So do I. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
yeah. And,
Yeah. So like you mentioned before, flat Earth, globe Earth. What's your take after all the research you've done, everything you've listened to, booked with all the shows that you do? What's your opinion?
well, snowplow going by at the moment. Hold on.
Okay.
You probably can't hear it now, but for a second it
No,
was
I
real
can't. No.
crunchy.
I heard just slightly, but yeah.
Okay, good. So yeah, I would go with neutral in the sense that I haven't been able to see it myself either way convincingly. What I mean by that is I've been convinced that it's flat, I've been convinced that it's round, and that kind of makes me think like, well, until I'm able to observe this with my own eyes, I don't know how I'd really make a determination. So it's not on my like main list of things to focus on. So maybe that disappoints people. But I find that the flat earth conversation, it gets very radical sometimes. Like when I've had it on the show, people get really, really radical in the sense that they're very like passionate and not necessarily in a friendly way. It's more like they work themselves up into this like rage because nobody believes them. And that's uncomfortable to talk to as a host. Like I don't necessarily want someone raging out on my podcast, and it's happened for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, then again, I've found a lot of those conversations really interesting, and I've gotten kind of fired up too. So yeah, I try to remain neutral, and I think it also is like it's a little bit of what you see it as, like not so much simulation theory, but more like, everything our mind observes is in a sense a hallucination. Like this conversation isn't really going on right now. Like there's a creation of you somewhere in my mind, and a part of my mind is talking to another part of my mind, and the same thing's going on for you, just in reverse. And I'm a figment of your mind talking to another, so your mind's talking to itself, right? So I think a lot of what we see around us conforms to that way as well, where like once you're set on the world is flat, you're going to see the world as flat. Once you're set on the world is round, you're going to see it as round. And I think that's part of why maybe they've told us it's round, to get us to think in finite terms and think that you're just this limited little nothing on this little planet that's so insignificant and coincidental and accidental, and what a miracle, but also how mundane. And science, this new religion, kind of gives us this like sense of like, oh yeah, you're just like a clump of chemicals, and by accident you can think, and I just I don't buy that. So in that sense, I'm with all the filmmakers who are like, throw all this out. We have to completely redefine the way we're seeing the world, and we're starting with the world itself. It's not round. Screw that. So I respect that. I do. I really do. Whether I want to live in that flat world or not yet, I'm not quite there yet. I think for me, it's more about what's pertinent, what's significant. And for me, learning about my own area has become really significant to me. Studying the history of what has gone on in the place that I was born has become really interesting for me. So, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. The whole flat Earth discussion, I come across that about 2015, I think, and maybe 2017, 18. it inspired me to go and do my own research. So I went and bought a P900 camera, and because everyone's saying we can see too far. If our eyes can only see 3 miles, 4 point something kilometers, why can we bring boats back into frame, with a really good zoom camera? So I'll try and work out how to share my screen here. How do you do that? I've taken some incredible footage here in South Australia. How do I share my screen on StreamYard? Do you know, bro?
Yeah, when your cursor's over the main window, it should have a
Yep.
button that comes up that says present, and then you click that and it'll allow you to share your screen. And then once you're there should be another button that allows you to display it. But since you're the host, I think it'll just do it automatically.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, I've taken a photo from Adelaide across the Gulf. What's the Gulf out there? Let me think. Gulf, Saint Vincent Gulf. I've taken a photo basically from the shore of Adelaide looking west. You can only see ocean, but there's a gulf over there. There's the York Peninsula, and I've taken a photo from the beach on South Australia, on Adelaide, of the silos, the grain storage silos straight across the Gulf. That is about 47, 48 miles away, and I've brought. It's not in focus because of the distance, and the lens. Going over the water, I guess, going through moisture, but you can clearly see that it's these silos in Port Giles. You shouldn't be able to see that via the calculations of, of a curvature of 8 inches per mile square. That should be about 400 meters out of my sight, but it's quite amazing. So yeah, I'll have to put this footage up on YouTube, overlaying this, but it's fascinating. Like you said, you got to do your own research. Hey, you got to do it yourself.
I've seen those photos before, and they are convincing. And I do, again, I don't doubt it at all. I think that there's far more evidence to suggest that scientists are willing to just fudge the numbers and make assumptions and say, "Oh no, we figured it out. Don't look any further. It's fine." And then someone like you comes along, points a camera at what they think is the wrong place and proves them wrong, and then they're like, "No, you did something wrong," and it's like, no, you just can't accept that you're not seeing the world for what it is, and here's a way that we've shown that, and I encourage that. Another really cool one is the live flight radar, that's available online for free. You can go there at any time.
I've got that on my phone. Yeah.
And you watch, and there are no planes that fly in this direction, across the South Pacific Sea. And it's weird because you'd think that, at least military and other types of planes that maybe don't stop at airports would still use that route because it's fast, it's less distance. And they say, no, nobody flies down there because there's nowhere for them to land in case of an emergency. So everybody just kind of hugs the coast and goes along the Pacific coasts. They don't ever go across. I'm just like thinking to myself, but they'll go across the Atlantic. Yeah, that's not a problem because there's only like 1 or 2 islands in the Atlantic. Like if you're going from France to New York City, you're not going over many islands. Yeah. And Greenland's not that close if you needed an emergency landing. So I don't know if I totally buy that explanation of like, oh, well, they just take that path because it's safer. It's like, well, they're also spending a lot more fuel to go that way too. So is it because it's safer, or is it because that's the only way you can go and you just can't go that way because they've taken a flat surface and pinned it onto a 3D surface that doesn't exist?
Yeah.
It's the model.
Just recently, I've seen this bloke do a presentation on underwater data cables, on how 99% of our data isn't shared via satellites, so-called satellites, satelloons, but it is all underwater data cables. And then he brought up across his screen where these major data cables around the world are going. And, Australia up through Asia into the UAE and all that through down through Africa, when really you would think if it's gonna sort of go down and underneath and around, but he said it makes more sense on the AE map than it does on the globe. It's quite a good little presentation actually. So yeah,
Yeah,
worth a
yeah,
look.
yeah.
Yeah,
Right on. Yeah, I
yeah,
like that. I think I have the UN map, which is like that, where it's, everything's
yeah,
kind of situated in the North Pole.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. And as far as we know, there really is no South Pole. Is that right? There's only one magnetic North Pole. Yeah, I've heard a lot of different stories about that. Whether it is, what is really going on up there? Is that the original Eden, or is that where the four rivers flow from? I don't know, but lots of stories. It's always good to talk about. Like, man, that's why we have discussions. Put some ideas out there. Like, it's great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, the whole, idea that there are lands that are uncharted, undiscovered. I'm all for it.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. I'm going to let you go, Mark. I better get to work within an hour and a half from now anyway. So can you please let everybody know where they can find you and your work?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Lincoln, for having me on the Lincoln Sharp Discussions podcast, aka the
On
LSD
LSD.
podcast. I love it. And yeah, my family thinks I'm crazy is the name of my podcast. It's also a
Yeah.
true statement. And I'm sure many people can relate when you start getting into these topics. Our
Mm.
families tend to think we're crazy. And that's a good
Yeah.
sign, because the
Yeah.
people closest to you are usually the last ones to get on board uh,
Mm.
when it comes to these kind of ventures. Anybody who's become an entrepreneur or are taking on any sort of small business venture like that, or really anything that requires, some individual gusto, you usually get some detractors in your immediate, circle of people. But yeah, that's the show. I've talked
Yeah.
to tons of interesting people, and if you like anything that I said today, you'll probably like my show. And Lincoln, I'd love to have you on my show at some point to go deep into your life, the things that you've done, the things that have led you to start the podcast and question everything. And so yeah, let's plan for that sometime soon, and hopefully we'll make it so you don't wake up so early in the morning.
Actually doesn't bother me. I'm a morning person anyway. But yeah,
Cool,
Mark, I
cool.
would love to come on your show and give a bit of a testimony. Or I'm actually thinking about branching a section of my show called Testify on LSD. Have people come on and tell their story about where they've come from, whether it's through recovery or rags to riches. I just love having conversations and discussions with people. So, yeah, Mark, thank you so much for your time today, man. I really appreciate it. Shout out to Sam, XG, and Johnny and the guys, man. And yeah, let's talk again soon, mate. That'd be awesome.
I'd love to. Thank you, brother. Great meeting you. And yeah, like I said, I'd love to have you on my show. So we'll plan for that in the near future. And until next time, thanks for having me.
Thanks very much, Mark. We'll talk to you soon.